get started. So, yes, a very warm welcome to Yogini for this session looking at design thinking applied to EA. So, Yogini Kale, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Philip. So, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining this session today. My name is Yogini, and I work as an enterprise architect within the CIO office at Ericsson Global Headquarters, that is based in Stockholm, Sweden. And today I will be talking about applying design thinking to the EA world. I know you've been seeing a lot of presentations today talking about engagement from enterprise architects and the value of reaching out to the business. Perhaps I might be able to give you a few insights on how design thinking can help you enable that. So let's get started. A little bit of an overview of the agenda for the day today for this session. So I will be starting with what is design thinking in wider context and what is it about. That will be followed by why is design thinking important in the enterprise architecture world, and following which I will explain how design thinking can be actually applied to EA. Then we will have a few very practical examples of different stages, research, empathy, and define, which are the stages in the design thinking cycle. A few examples on that, and then we'll be wrapping up with the key takeaways. We'll have a short Q&A session towards the end of this presentation. So I request you all to post your questions in the chat, and we will try to take a few questions towards the end to address. So with that, let's look into what is design thinking in a wider context. I'm sure this is not the first design thinking presentation that you are into, and you have heard and seen a lot about how design thinking can be applied in different contexts. But if you look at a common definition of design thinking, it is a human-centric problem-solving approach for large distributed teams to help them resolve business challenges. In a general context, design thinking comprises of 5 stages, which starts with empathizing with your audience, trying to understand their needs, and then defining the scope and the problem that you want to address. And then you get into the ideation stage where you do a lot of brainstorming and come up with the potential solutions that could address your user needs. And then you get into the rapid prototyping or creating MVPs and then testing those and gathering feedback. What is important to understand is that this is an iterative cycle, and it happens in continuity. So if you kind of see how it translates into the business context, then it can be kind of defined as a double diamond model, where there are 2 major diamonds that define the problem space and the solution space. So if you see here, the first diamond basically focuses on how to design the right thing, where you see you start with an awareness, and then you start doing research, conducting qualitative interviews with your audience, discovering and getting insights into the problems and understanding what are their needs. And then you scope down the focus, and you try to kind of understand what is the problem, and you try to define the problem here. So, so this is where you try to define the problem. And then when you get into the next diamond, it is more about designing things right, where you identify the potential solutions, you develop prototypes, and you release those for receiving customer feedback. Now, uh, it's important to understand that you can go into iterations at the end of each of these diamonds, and depending on what was the outcome of each cycle. So if you think that you do not have enough information towards the end of the first diamond, then you could actually go back and iterate and repeat the first diamond. If you think you have enough information to get into the ideation stage, then you get into the next diamond, and then you take feedback, you come back here, you conduct this again based on the feedback that you had received. And towards the convergence of these two diamonds, there is always an opportunity to redefine your problem statement. And that is, in fact, a very important aspect of design thinking, because it keeps you on track to make sure that you are solving the right problems. Now, let's get into a little bit of understanding why design thinking is important in the EA world. I want to start with sharing a short story on which I could relate to in terms of why design thinking is important in the EA world. So recently, I have been going through a few feeds on LinkedIn, and then there was one of these posts that caught my attention, which was very interesting. It was about a gentleman who shares his name with one of the most iconic celebrities in the music world, Taylor Swift. So, this post was about his experience of explaining how disappointed a restaurant lady was when the other day he reserved a table in the name of Taylor Swift, and he showed up um, as Taylor Swift at the restaurant. So we all can imagine the disappointment of the restaurant lady, right? That must be harsh. So, we as enterprise architects, how do we relate to this experience? When we go with our nice and shiny blueprints, architecture blueprints to the business stakeholders, they are all in, right? But what happens when it comes to business decision making? You kind of get a response which is like, who are you? Just like the restaurant lady, right? So, what is missing here? Where is the gap? And this is one of the gaps that design thinking can help you address. It is very important to be connected with your business stakeholders to make sure that you are influencing the decision making within the organization. And design thinking helps you connect with your business stakeholders, with your customers, or whoever is your target audience to influence the actual business decision making within the organization. And it becomes all the more important in a complex organization which operates at a very large scale. An organization like Ericsson, where you have more than 100,000 people working together from 84 plus locations across the globe, it becomes very, very important and vital to make sure that the enterprise architecture unit is connected with multiple business units, market areas, and the important business stakeholders to make sure that they are contributing towards business decision making. Then it's also important to understand what architecture aligns with your enterprise roadmap, because it's not just about sitting in the ivory towers and designing the best architecture blueprint, right? It has to be aligned with your strategic goals. You should understand what are your stakeholders' expectations and what is your enterprise roadmap. So these are a few things that design thinking can help you achieve in an enterprise architecture context. And we will look into this or try to understand this by taking an example problem, which is about how do you make target architecture plan more consumable for your end users to increase the adoption. A few challenges that we could face in this business scenario are user awareness, user adoption, wider collaboration, and relevance and prescriptiveness for the target architecture that you design for the organization. Let's see how design thinking approach can help us solve these challenges in the business problem that we are working on. So coming to how design thinking can be applied to the EA world, I'll just check on the time. Okay, we are good. So just to understand how design thinking can be applied to the EA world, we again go back to this double diamond approach where we see that we have research, empathy, and define stage in the first diamond, and then we have ideate, prototype, and validation, which can go in multiple iterations. And then in the middle, we have an opportunity to redefine the problem based on the results that we measure from each iteration. How does this translate into the EA world? Well, it starts with the very first step of identifying your enterprise users in scope, and then you interview and understand their needs. You define the scope in each iteration for what is the problem statement or what is the problem that you want to focus on. You reflect, and then you get into the brainstorming sessions for ideation, and you build prototypes. You release the product and the prototypes for testing. You evaluate and gather the learnings, and then you iterate and keep making the changes. So it is a continuous loop of observing, reflecting, and making the prototypes or the product or a service suitable for your target audience. It could be your business stakeholders, customers, to make sure that it is aligned with their expectations. And what is most important is you continuously reflect on your journey in these iterations and correct your direction based on the inputs or the feedback that you receive during each iteration. Looking into the example that we were talking about, there are a few standard templates that can be used from the design thinking world. And one of the examples of how this was applied in developing the target architecture plan to suit the user needs is where so if you look at this template, there are different areas that you can define as a user journey in a regular context. So say, for example, if it is a product that we're talking about, the user journey could start with awareness, consideration, purchasing the product, onboarding, and then advocacy, or maybe, sharing the word about it. There are multiple swim lanes that we can identify here based on the interviews that we conduct. This could always be customized. So if you look here in the architecture context, we started with the very first stage in the user journey as need for architecture info, then looking for architecture info, finding architecture info, and applying the findings. The most important aspect here is being able to read the emotions or the experience of your users during each stage of this user journey. So this is very much about, this template is very much about documenting your user interviews, the research that you have performed, and then comes the stage where you empathize with your users. And how do you do that? When you conduct such multiple interviews, you could actually have a mapping of um, what was the feel or the emotional aspect in each stage for the users that you have interviewed. And then here you get a very clear picture of which area do you want to focus on. See, for example, here, if you see, there is a lot of frustration around usage and awareness. And then if you see that awareness is very much in the beginning of the user journey, then perhaps you could start with focusing on the awareness aspect while working parallelly on some potential solutions for onboarding. So this is how design thinking can help you focus on the problem and understand um, what are the frustrations that your users are going through. Great. This is another way of consolidating the findings from your research and define stage. So when you identify the top pain points and perhaps the potential solutions, so if you see here in the interview, you also hear some potential solutions or desirable solutions from each of these personas that you interview. So you could come up with a similar table for potential solutions also. However, I am just giving you an example of the top pain points, how you could kind of categorize this in the enterprise architecture context. So it could be about generating awareness of your target architecture, enough engagement on onboarding your business stakeholders to use this target for deployment, governance, architecture management, connection with your strategy, getting the support from your leadership, better decision trees, UI, UX in terms of how exactly this information is consumed within your organization. So these are certain aspects that can be addressed. And then depending on the empathy map that we saw earlier, you could focus on which pain points you want to work on in your first iteration. So coming to the key takeaways of today's session, I would say that design thinking in the enterprise architecture world is very much about a continuous loop of observing, reflecting, and making the prototypes and the product to suit your business or customer requirements, making sure that you're continuously connected with your business stakeholders. Some important key takeaways from the session today are that it's very important to understand that design thinking is not a magic wand that will fix all your problems. It is a mindset, or you could say a tool or methodology to help you understand your stakeholder needs, perhaps some of which you were not even aware of. So there are always other factors which are playing. So it's important to understand that it's not something that will fix all your problems. Then design thinking to be successful within your organization, it's important that you have a culture of experimentation, reflection, and openness for feedback, along with support from your leadership in terms of commitment of resources and budget. So it takes a mindset shift to make this successful. And last but not the least, design thinking is not a one-time activity that you identify your stakeholder problems and you build the right solution to address it, and then you're done. It's a continuous journey, and it should become a part of your ways of working, your culture, to derive maximum value out of it in the enterprise context. So that was about how you apply design thinking in the EA world and design thinking in general in the business context. So with that, we open up for the question answers. I'll just have a look in the chat. if there are any questions yet. So please feel free to post your questions in the chat here, and I'd be happy to take your questions. Okay, so while we wait for some questions here, I'm not sure if it is a problem at my end, if I'm not able to see the chat or something, but I don't know if Philip is here. Perhaps he could help me pick up a few questions. But while we are waiting for a few questions in the chat here to appear, I would like to mention that there is a lot of confusion around, uh, uh, you know, understanding how design thinking can be used in conjunction with agile ways of working and in DevOps ways of working. So, as I already mentioned, design thinking is very much a mindset or a tool that can be applied in any context. So, if you are already following an agile setup in your organization or in your project, then you can always have these design sprints which apply the design thinking approach and help you refine your problem statement continuously to make sure that you are on track. So yes, that was about how you apply design thinking in the EA world, and it helps you connect better with your stakeholders. Um, and that's all from my side. If you have any questions related to design thinking, how it can be applied to the EA world, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Here on the screen, you see a QR code that takes you to my LinkedIn profile. So I would be happy to connect with you.
Wonderful, Yogini. Really, really super interesting presentation. I think there's one more question that's coming from Sarah that you didn't get to, saying, how would you start this when it's new to an organization?
Yes, so that's a very good question because it's a very good opportunity when you are just starting off with design thinking, because you start with a fresh slate where you start connecting with your end users or your business stakeholders to understand their needs. So the best way to start would be to identify a small set of users that you want to have qualitative interviews with, have detailed qualitative interviews with them, and understand and empathize with their challenges that they face. And that is what is the human-centric aspect of design thinking, because you can put all the data in an AI model and it can churn something and give you the list of challenges. But then it's not always what you see on the surface, right? When you have these human interactions, you actually get to understand the pain points, and then you know where to focus on.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the whole presentation. It was a great addition to the agenda, and we look forward to seeing you again sometime.
Thank you so much. And thanks for listening.